Hiya 13, well done for sitting down to watch the video. Hope you have your booklets with you and a cup of tea. And we are going to go through in this video the remaining two seismic event case studies, which is going to be the Haiti 2021 earthquake and the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, which happened in the Indian Ocean. So the way that this fits in is it's part of the seismic hazards section. So we've sort of skipped back a little here, but hopefully you can sort of start to see how a lot of these case studies, even though the hazard events are very different, you can see how a lot of the impacts and the responses, there's a lot of overlap and synopticity there. So, of course, at this point, it's really worth mentioning the Ilan Kelman book, Disaster by Choice. And I strongly recommend reading the first chapter, or if you have the audiobook version, listening to the first chapter, because it's all about Haiti and the 2010 earthquake, which is actually not the earthquake we're looking at, but it is important context, which I'm going to talk about later in this video. And the first chapter of this book is really excellent, and it explains and talks about why Haiti was so vulnerable to that disaster. So I really strongly recommend that. Okay, so firstly, it's really important to note that the most famous earthquake that happened in Haiti was in 2010. And this is, well, infamous, really, I should say, because there were so many deaths. And you can see on this infographic here that since 1900, it's been, and it is still to date, the most deadly earthquake that has occurred. What you will see there at number 4 is the Sumatra earthquake. So that's the Boxing Day tsunami that we're looking at. So that's why these two events, I know they're additional case studies, but I think they're really important to talk about because they give you context of sort of large scale, global, kind of widespread events, especially in the Boxing Day tsunami impact. So let's have a look at the right-hand infographic, and you've got a space for context on your sheet on the front of your page where you can just make a few notes about the number of people who lost their lives, the number of injuries that there were, how much damage there was, the cost of the damage, the amount of aid, etc. Good to have a few stats up your sleeve, and make a note of a couple of those now. So I'm not going to talk for too long about this event because I want to focus more on the 2021 event. However, it's really important to talk about just how catastrophic and devastating this was for Haiti. This was something which they took over a decade to recover from. And that's why it's so important, is because 11 years later, when the next earthquake hit, they still hadn't fully recovered from the 2010 earthquake. One of the most significant impacts was actually a secondary effect, which was that because there was such a huge aid effort, particularly from IGOs and organizations like the UN. So there's a nice link to human here. You can see how this starts to link to kind of some of the global work that you've done. There was so many kind of external sort of players, I suppose, which meant that the organisation was of the recovery was very kind of haphazard, and UN peacekeepers infamously brought in cholera, and they also were there supposedly to keep the peace, but then there were some incidents of awful sexual abuse from peacekeepers to Haitian citizens. So it was a very controversial aid recovery experience, and there was a huge abuse of power. There was a lot of money that was lost and sort of not accounted for, and it didn't end up in the right places. Going towards rebuilding homes and rebuilding schools and improving the communities in Haiti who were so badly affected. So a lot of corruption, not necessarily just from within Haiti, but also from international organisations as well, which just sort of hindered the overall quality of the recovery, really. So Haiti, as I think I mentioned a few lessons ago, before the earthquake in 2010 hit, it was already the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and that was due to a number of factors which we're going to talk about in a moment, linked to their sort of historical past and the role of colonialism. But then all of the events that happened after the earthquake just meant that kind of extreme poverty that so many people have been living in only worsened and became more widespread. So it's really important to address the role of colonialism when we think about the history of Haiti and why it was so vulnerable to the 2010 earthquake and why it was such a catastrophic event. So I'm not going to read out all of these stats, but the key point about colonialism was that Haiti was one of the first nations to seek independence through a revolution, seek independence from France, who had been their colonizer. And as a result of this, France forced Haiti to pay back what was effectively known as an independence debt for over a century. So what this meant was Haiti ended up in huge amounts of debt, taking out loans from other countries to be able to afford this debt. And instead of investing all of that money into developing their economy, improving their infrastructure, as they would have wished to do, it meant that they were kind of hindered by this economic burden that they had to carry for so many years. In addition to that, no country wanted to trade with Haiti. So for many years, it was very isolated. And again, you can start to see how that links to other concepts that you looked at in globalization and being a sort of switched off nation. And so this overall led to Haiti having a lower income. So when we talk about Haiti, yes, it was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. The context around that is really important. That was basically enforced on them by the colonizers of France. So today, Haiti only has a very, very low literacy rate, 20% of its population that can read and write. And when we hear stats like this, it can often paint this picture of a kind of hopeless nation which, can't improve itself. But we mustn't forget all of these historical factors which have led to this current situation. And I'm sure you can imagine when a country is kind of hit by a devastating natural hazard like the ones we've been learning about, not having the kind of basic literacy rate among all your population can be a real challenge, even in terms of just spreading information and sharing ideas about how to recover. Even as a kind of mitigation factor before an event, it can be a real challenge and a real limitation. Okay, so moving on to the 2021 event then. So that context of what had happened in 2010 is really important, but we can just go to the top of your sheet now and we'll just make a few notes. So in 2021, the magnitude was 7.3 on the Richter scale, and we'll talk about the Mercalli scale rating in a moment. It happened in August, 14th of August 2021. And you'll notice how the capital, Port-au-Prince, there is shown on these maps. And it was just a little further west, about 125 kilometers west of the capital city, further away than the 2010 earthquake had been. That had been only 15 kilometers away from the capital. So you can imagine why that also caused so many deaths. The population density was higher near the capital, so that was a factor. But the other thing that's really important to look at here is that on this graphic, we can see that there was a few days later, I'm just going to underline it there, a tropical storm Grace, which kind of moved right the way through the Caribbean Sea, just south of where the earthquake had struck. So you can imagine these kind of multi-hazard environments, when they're hit by two events in quick succession, it can make recovery very challenging because there is huge amounts of chaos. You're just starting to recover from one event and then you're hit by another. What you can also see in the left-hand image down here, it's kind of small, but you can see the sort of earthquake intensity and where most of the shaking was. It was in this kind of like oblong shape along the rupture of where the two plates that had moved past each other on this conservative plate boundary, where they had slipped and where all that seismic energy was released. So just another map on the left here, which shows a very similar graphic to the one on the right hand side, but the additional information which is useful, I think, on this map is it shows the sort of times and the dates at which point the storm sort of moved westwards past Haiti through the Caribbean Sea. The other thing to mention is that the depth of the focus, so you should remember that the epicenter is the point on the surface directly above the focus. The focus is the point within the Earth where the energy is released. The focus was only 10 kilometers deep, which is a very, very shallow earthquake. So that's why a lot of the shaking on the surface was quite intense. Right, so you can flip over to the next page now, which is where we're going to start looking at some of the impacts. So in terms of the primary impacts, there were far fewer deaths than in 2010. They had been able to set up some slightly better building design. They had learned from some of the mistakes from the 2010 earthquake, but also this just wasn't in such a populated area, and that was possibly the most significant factor. However, it was still the deadliest earthquake and natural disaster, in fact, of 2021. So across that year, it was still the most significant event. Over 12,000 people were injured, and it had the most casualties of any disaster since the 2018 Indonesian earthquake. 130 homes were damaged or destroyed. 53 medical facilities suffered partial damage, and 6 were totally destroyed. And again, you can imagine the consequence of your medical facilities being kind of destroyed during a time when you have lots and lots of people who are injured. And about 1,060 schools were damaged or destroyed. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video now and write those key facts onto your sheet, and then I want you to evaluate the severity of these. So you might want to just read what I've said and make a judgment. You might want to do a little bit of extra research to find out why you think these were more or less significant, and I want you to justify your evaluation that you put onto the little thermometers where you judge the severity of each event. So pause the video, do that now. Now, in terms of secondary impacts, the most significant one possibly was that there were hundreds of landslides which took place, not only destroying ecosystems and habitats, but also homes were destroyed, roads were cut off, and this just made the kind of clear up operation even more challenging. In addition to this, as we said earlier, Tropical Storm Grace brought heavy rainfall 2 days later. That turned the landslides into mud, led to widespread flooding, further cut off roads, made it more difficult for emergency vehicles to access those who needed help. And now this says a 3-meter high tsunami was recorded around the capital. Actually, this was not quite true. A 3-meter high tsunami warning was sent out. In the end, only a 3 centimeters was recorded. Now, this is important when you're evaluating, because the warning was sent out, which you can imagine the kind of panic that this might lead to. And then actually there was only a really small consequence as a result of that. So at a time when there's already kind of panic and chaos, that can obviously be challenging, and you can judge how severe you think that impact might be. So same again, I want you to pause the video, write down some of those impacts, evaluate the severity, and do your justification. Right, so in terms of the responses, I'm just going to put all of these up for you. There you go. And what I would like you to do is pause the video now, read through these points, same as before, note down what happened, but this time we're doing an evaluation slightly differently, using the concentric circles. So if you shade in 3 circles, you think it was a very effective response, 2 partially effective, and 1 not so effective. There's also a key at the top for you to categorize short-term and long-term. So you can put in a couple of points about aid, for example, one of them being short term and one of them being long term. So pause the video now and complete that section. So now we're going to move on to the Boxing Day tsunami. So while we're going through this, you can be thinking about the similarities or differences between these 2 events and thinking about how you might be able to compare them. So just a reminder about tsunamis. They're usually triggered most commonly by earthquakes that rock the ocean floor. That displaces a column of water above it, pushing it upwards. This then, the water then spreads out in all directions, setting off these kind of oscillation waves. They develop underwater, they grow at great speed, and then as soon as they reach the land, and the seabed kind of shallows, that causes the waves to massively grow in height, and this can lead to widespread flooding as the land is inundated as the wave approaches the shore. So as I say, it's usually caused by earthquake, can occasionally be caused by underwater landslides or volcanoes, obviously very rarely caused by meteorite impacts, but the type of flooding, it's very different to a storm surge, simply because of the scale of it. The size of these waves can be huge, as we'll see in a moment. Now, what happened in this event, I'm going to show you a map of where this happened in a moment, but let's just take a look at what was going on in terms of the tectonics here. So whereas the Haiti event was on a conservative plate boundary where two plates were sort of sliding past one another in opposite directions, this was where two plates were moving towards one another. So we have the India plate, which is subducting beneath the Burma plate, where Sumatra is. Sumatra is an island which is part of Indonesia. And this is called the Sunda Trench. And where this is happening, there is, as we know, along the Wadati-Benioff zone, a huge number of earthquakes. Often these are minor earthquakes, and they occur all the way along that fault line where one plate is subducting beneath the other. And this is where the earthquake focus happened, and this was what triggered that upward wave along that fault line, again that displacement of that column of water, which was then sent out in all directions. So I think it's really important to understand why the epicenter of the quake being so close to Indonesia was so significant. The size of the waves, which reached the Sumatra coastline, were up to 34 meters in some locations. And you can see on this graphic that shows you, relative to a London bus, the size of how tall that would have been. And hence why you can see in the proportional circles in the top right map that there were 130,000 deaths in Indonesia because of, again, the proximity to the epicenter and therefore just the sheer size of the waves, meaning that entire coastlines were absolutely obliterated when the wave approached the shore. So here we go. You can see on these three different maps, they're all showing very similar things, but in slightly different ways. So I've included all of them. You can see there where the epicenter was. So you can write this on your sheet now. The magnitude was a 9.2, I believe, actually it was, earthquake. Actually still one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded, never mind the tsunami which followed. There's all sorts of statistics on these graphics. You can see the number of people who died, the number who were missing, the number of buildings and houses that were destroyed, the total cost of recovery, and clearly some of these impacts are most significant in Indonesia, but Sri Lanka also really suffered as a result of this event. So that's important to note as well. What you will also see is on the sort of western side of the Indian Ocean that there were deaths in the Maldives and in places like Somalia and Kenya, and those were, I mean, literally thousands of miles away, and yet they were still affected by the size of the waves. People on those shorelines were still killed. Again, it just gives you an idea of the scale of this event. So the countries that were affected, you can pause the video and add these on now. You can also make a note of the fact that, as we know, this was on Boxing Day, so the 26th of December in 2004. Now, for the back page, which is all about the impacts and the responses, I'm actually going to put a few links to some good information, which there's no point in me recreating because it's really straightforward and clear for you that you can make notes for this section using. But one of the things that's really important to state is that there was not, along many countries in the Indian Ocean at the time, a tsunami warning system in place, which is why so many people were killed. There were measuring stations which had acknowledged the size of this earthquake, and that where there were seismologists who knew that there was going to be a tsunami reaching these coastlines, and they had no warning system or procedure or policy in place which enabled them to warn communities, which you can imagine would have been a really difficult and frustrating situation for them to be in. Since this has happened, many of these nations now have warning systems all along their coastlines. They have sirens along their beaches if there's a tsunami warning, and that happened as a result of this event. And in fact, that wasn't just the case in the Indian Ocean. This has also happened across the United States, parts of Eastern Africa. The awareness and understanding of tsunamis is really improved since this event. So if there's one positive to take from it, it's that people's knowledge and understanding about what to do in a tsunami event has improved as a result. So finally, to finish, I just want to leave you with this map, which I think is just really striking and shows the significance of the tsunami. You can see the sort of amplitude and how it spread around the world. So again, if you're thinking about kind of the way it might have been felt in different parts of the world, and kind of the size of the waves in different locations, this is a useful one that you can just pause and take a look at. And something that you might want to refer to if you're thinking about global scale versus local scale events. So don't forget, the links for the impacts and responses to the Boxing Day tsunami will be probably both on Show My Homework and on YouTube, and you can use those to make those notes. Don't forget to do your evaluations as well, and I hope that you found these two case studies interesting, and that there's something that you would be able to refer to if you had any question on a tsunami or on the significance of seismic events, and hopefully you've got lots now that you can get stuck into there. Well done.